Mark Smith is a veteran DC lobbyist and has over the past 2 decades owned and managed the Da Vinci Group, Inc., a government relations and public affairs firm in Washington, D.C. He enjoys relationships with several members of Congress, and his close relationships with key staffers on both sides of the aisle give Mr. Smith an advantage to understand all sides of important issues facing Congress and his clients' interests. Mr. Smith has had enormous success in legislative affairs, general consulting, and campaign fundraising on congressional campaigns with an over 83% success record over the past decade. So I appreciate your time, Mr. Smith. And my first question is kind of a bit of an elephant in the room, I guess you could say, with the news today, that I was curious, in your opinion, if you think that President Trump's testing positive for COVID-19 could possibly have an effect on his standing in the polls and his chances at re-election.
You know, I think since it is a first in our history with this type of virus, and really a first in politics, but, you know, welcome to 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. I know. We don't know yet. But honestly, I think, you know, people that support the president, like myself and others, know that he is a strong individual, a lot of energy, but more importantly, he's getting the best care in the world. Walter Reed is a premier medical facility, and so in that regard, I really don't worry about that too much. But for those that might be either undecided and are looking at that and going, well, you know, maybe you should have wore a mask more often, or they reflect on how they may not have done that themselves as much, I don't know. I think very much like the Supreme Court nomination that's coming up, it'll have its moment over a crescendo of a short period of time, and it'll go away. I think that, like world leaders and others here in the United States that are wishing the best for the First Lady and also for our president, that he'll recover and will be back out on the campaign trail prosecuting his positions on issues that Americans care about.
And with today, with the announcement that Joe Biden said that he is going to be suspending his attack ads on Trump's campaign nationwide, do you think that this could possibly have a negative impact on Biden's campaign in some of the battleground states?
No, I do not. I think the former vice president understands how to be respectful. The debate the other night was not an example of that. But I would say that is a very respectful move on his part, and I think that it is appropriate and the kind of decorum that most of us in this country, albeit somewhat divided on some issues, understand that that's the right thing to do.
And I'm glad you mentioned the debate, because that was actually a follow-up question that I had. You know, when I was reading over your memo that you sent out, you mentioned a little bit about, like, you know, how your opinions were pre-debate, and so I was going to ask you after the debate and you viewed it, did any of your predictions or opinions change after seeing that?
No, not particularly. I think that you may have had some persuaded voters to go one way over the other. That is yet to be determined. But in terms of the races, House, Senate, the single governor's race that I think that will flip to the Republicans' side of the aisle in Montana, I don't think that has an impact either way. On the presidential race, again, we're still 32 days out. That is yet to be seen in terms of the polls. There's a lot left to do. I think today, with the COVID relief package getting closer and closer, both Democrats and Republicans know they need to get something done. And part of that is reflected in the vote that was taken last night on the Democrats' COVID package, You had 18 defections from the Democrat side that voted against it, and they gabbled the vote closed very quickly when they normally will leave one open, and that was arguably so that my Democrat friends would not see any more defections, and that bill would have gone down to defeat, because it was 214 to 207, if I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. Yeah, it was pretty close.
Yeah, that's very close, especially with the way Congress is right now.
Correct. And they gabbled it closed about a half a minute after the 15-minute vote was over. So they didn't want any more defections. Yeah, they didn't want any more defections than they already had. And, if you just look at the Congresswoman, I believe Cindy Axne is from Iowa, she was very upset and voted against it because, she knew that it was going to die in the Senate, and so did 17 of her other Democrat colleagues. And she was like, what am I going to go home and tell my constituents? We voted on a bill we knew was going to die, and therefore we did it anyway. What's the point, right?
That's very true, especially with Congress, that you have you have people that you have to answer to and people that can come to your office.
Right. Well, these days they can't go to the office, but when they go home, they definitely can, and they left actually today.
Interesting. Man, well, that's kind of going into a little bit of that you were mentioning with Congress, and then with some of those congressional races. In your memo, there was one area that I found very interesting, that you mentioned the ability of highly accurate micro-targeting that goes all the way up to the point of a person casting a ballot, and if you could elaborate a little bit more on that type of polling and how it works.
Sure, absolutely. I want to give a little credit to the Obama team in 2008, although they didn't use as much of it in 2012 as they could have. But they sort of began that process of micro-targeting with GPS on smartphones, et cetera. They used it a little bit more. They used it a little bit in the 2012 reelect. But in 2016, and I want to give a lot of credit to Jared Kushner, Brad Parscale, and that team that they set up in 2015 in Texas, they began using micro-targeting as a means of driving messaging directly to voters relative to the apps that they have on their phones. So the term of service in an app, not to get real technical, when you say, yes, I agree with your terms of service, instead of sitting there reading, some lawyer's stereo instructions on your Etsy app or your, Travelocity app, right? You just go, yeah, sure, no problem. Well, they can find you and where you go and where you shop and that type of thing vis-a-vis GPS on your phone. And so they can drive messages to you based on a algorithm and a profile that's been built for certain types of voters. So they do that very effectively, all the way up to the moment of you going into the voting booth. And it's interesting because it also argues for future debates, perhaps not this cycle, but in 2024 and going forward. Why do we need two people standing at a dais with a moderator when you could have a more interactive debate on different platforms? I would argue that type of antiquated debating style is dead, and they should really be doing this kind of debating over social media. That's one reason why they didn't have a spin room in the debate on Tuesday. There's no need for it.
It's true what you said of like how things are moving along into different forms of debate. It even reminded me of, I want to say it was last week or something, there was a poll I saw that said 60% of people wanted Biden and Trump to be on the Joe Rogan show debating, and it's like you never heard that kind of stuff 10 years ago,
100%. Yeah, 100%. You're absolutely right. And I think that, given Joe Rogan's previous, job, and now the one he has now, it would have been more entertaining.
And kind of like piggybacking a little bit off of what we were just chatting about with the polling. One question, this is kind of a personal question I've always been curious about with polling, kind of what the difference is between like internal polling and public polling. Because sometimes I notice how you'll hear about how they're very different and some of the results are different. And so I was kind of curious if you had any opinions on that.
Well, I do, and part of that is reflected in the memo that you have. I'll kind of take the second part first. I only look at daily tracking polling after Labor Day. I don't take polling seriously before Labor Day. I certainly do not take averages of polling seriously at all. When you play a baseball game or you play a football game, you have a score. You have a winner and a loser. And that's the same way with elections on Election Day. If you want to average your scores and whatnot over a season, that's a completely different argument. So saying that someone over an average of polls has an 11-point lead, that's highly misleading. And so I use, excuse me, I use Republican and Democrat polling firms. I look at Democrat and Republican polling firms that do daily tracking of likely voters in the states, in precincts, in counties, because that really tells you what in the heck is really going on the ground in that point in time. And it gives you a much more accurate understanding of what people may be thinking and being interested in. And so that's what I typically do. And I do that literally every day, all throughout the day, the next 32 days.
Yeah. And that seems like, that would be the most accurate way to check polling, because when you hear about how like the Trump campaign was knocking on, it was like, I think I read it was like 1 million doors a week in like Rust Belt and stuff. That that you would have constant opinions and everything changing over that time.
Well, it's that, and it's also voter contact in terms of registration as well. So they're knocking on doors and doing voter contact and talking about issues, and then they're also registering people to vote as well. And so in a number of swing states, Republican registration has gone up 2, 3, 4-fold over Democrat registration. And I'll give you a perfect example of that is in the state of Pennsylvania. So we've registered almost 45,000 more Republicans than the Democrats have, and the Democrats have lost over 90,000 Democrat voters. That's a 2-to-1 ratio. Yeah. And then the additional voter registration has been almost a 4 or 5-to-1 margin. And so you're seeing in a state like Pennsylvania where you have many more Republicans registered and ready to vote on the Republican side and for the president. Florida is another case. North Carolina is another one. Georgia. And as a matter of fact, just as an aside, these extensions of Election Day balloting are being thrown out left and right. There was a report just an hour ago from Georgia, a 2-to-1 vote to throw out, extending the vote days after November 3rd was just thrown out by an appeals court 2-to-1.
Wow.
So you're seeing a lot of Democrat maneuvering on ballots being looked at by the courts, and they're going, November 3rd is not November 10th. So no, and they're throwing it out, and you're going to see more of that. And if it doesn't satisfy the judiciary, you're going to see this go to the Supreme Court, and they're going to throw it out too. Yeah, I've seen friends of mine sending me things on social media where they have 5, 6, 7 ballots, you can't just send out 80 million ballots across the country. I have a colleague of mine that lives on Capitol Hill. He got 3 of them. A colleague of mine in Virginia got 7 of them with 4 other people that had lived in the house before.
Oh, good grief! And
you
don't hear about that stuff in the news.
Shocker.
It's I always joke that sometimes I have to go to Australian news to hear stuff sometimes.
I get up early in the morning and read many periodicals and reports from all over the planet. So I get a sense of what they're thinking and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, kind of going along with, what you were talking about with the, registering new voters, in your opinion, that the majority of this election is about swaying voters, or would you say it's about maintaining and expanding the base of support that he consolidated in 2016?
I think it's both. I think you have your core base, you build out that base with additional voters, and then you look to those undecideds or independents. With all due respect to the undecideds or particularly the independents, I refer to them as the occupants of the land of misfit toys, because why haven't you made up your mind, right? For me, and you've got my report there with you. The most important issues are always economy, jobs, in this case, law enforcement and public safety. COVID, I think, would be an easy 4th issue. SCOTUS, or the Supreme Court nominee, kind of occupies that 3rd slot for the time being. But by the time that vote hits the Senate floor the week of the 22nd of October, you're still a week and a half, almost 10 days out from the election. And that's going to be something that Americans check off the box and go, okay, that's done. And law enforcement moves into that 3rd space. COVID is very important to people because it's their health. But at the same time, you then have issues like healthcare, immigration, certainly the environment, things of that nature on down the line. I think I have 14 or 15 items in that particular list all the way down. But, most important to people are the economy and what does that mean for them, their job, hoping to keep it or come back to it. Law enforcement and public safety is critical because of the rash of violence that we've seen throughout the country, and the importance of having safety in any community, urban, suburban, rural. But then last but not least, I would argue very strongly that taxes are an issue. We don't want our taxes to go back up. There's no rationale for that. Unless you're going to continue exorbitant government spending.
No, that's very true. I kind of a joke that I always say, to people is that when you're in high school and early college, you're a socialist, and then when you get your first job and your first house, you turn into a capitalist.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. That's very Churchillian of you.
Going back a little bit to what you were mentioning with how polling can be so inaccurate, and sometimes looking at the broader picture doesn't always give you kind of that laser focus that you need to see. There's a lot of people, I would say, in the conservative media and even in some of the more moderate media that are saying that a lot of the polls are looking eerily similar to how it looked in 2016. And I was going to ask you, your opinion. Do you hold that same view, or do you think it's more complex than that?
What I will say is that it is not a coincidence that the polling methodology that got the election incorrect for the quote unquote mainstream media, first of all, they're using the same firms as they used in 2016 to put polls out. I saw one today that I almost spit my coffee out. I was laughing so hard when I saw it. Same firm got it massively wrong with Mrs. Clinton and then candidate Trump, and they're using the same methodology today. And I wouldn't even bother to throw that in the waste can. You just throw it right out the window because it's completely useless. And then when they pivot from average of polls over to the quote unquote actual number, it is somehow eerily the same as it was on election night. So go figure that math, right? Hence the reason why I look at likely voters, daily tracking polls. So I look at Rasmussen reports, I look at Zogby, who is a Democrat firm, and I will also use Trafalgar sort of as a balance between those other two, because they have a very specific methodology that looks at and talks to thousands of likely voters, not 800, not 450, not 600, but several thousand, and they don't weight their scores 75% Democrat, 25% Republican. It's a third, a third, and a third. It's Democrat, Republican, and Independents. And that gives you a much truer picture. It may not be what NBC Nightly News wants to report, or our friends over there at CNN or what have you, and even to some extent Fox, which has gone off the rails a little bit. It's like, you guys are drinking all the same Kool-Aid, you know.
Yeah.
Make sure you're wearing a mask, right? But at the same time, you know, they have a very interesting methodology. I think they really need to, you know, rework that somehow.
And it makes sense that, you know, of course, having the larger, you know, like you said, looking at several thousand is going to be better than looking at smaller.
You're going to get a better sample with a bit larger sample. You know, polling is an art; it's not a science. And you have to use a methodology where you can tease out the right type of information, not just have blanket questions that are disproportionately leaning one way or the other, and then build these what are called crosstabs with the demographics in it, and then all of a sudden you know pop out a poll and somebody's up 7 points when they're really up 1.5 points in reality. And then the other part of this too that we're not talking about or haven't yet is the undervote. There was a silent majority in 2016 that scared the living daylights out of my Democrat friends, and one of the firms that I mentioned a minute ago believes that this silent majority is twice the size. Hence the reason why they want to mail out ballots.
You know, I agree with you in the sense that, you know, there's a lot of friends of mine, you know, who I wouldn't necessarily call conservative, you know, but they like Trump, you know, they're leaning his way because, you know, economics, various different issues, but people who voted Obama, you know, in the previous election, you know, and it's very interesting seeing them kind of swing over.
Well, I refer to that as relatable confidence and a return to normal, right? So people like the stock market, like you getting up in the morning and knowing that you'll be able to walk outside safely, get in your car or on your bike, head down to a coffee house, go over to the grocery store, go to your job. You have a certainty and a confidence rather that is what's going to happen every morning. And people want to return back to normal. We're a center-right country disproportionately anyway. And whether you like someone's personality or not, you look at what this economy has done prior to COVID. And, I mean, 3.4% unemployment. I mean, come on. Everybody was working that wanted a job. and you still had 12, 15 million positions across our whole economy that weren't filled because they couldn't find the workers to fill the jobs. So you had a skills gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the president and his team over the last 3 years, 3.5, 4 years have been building mechanisms to close that skills gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
People want to return back to that. They don't want uncertainty. I'm not a personal fan of the former vice president for a variety of different reasons, but this gentleman has been on so many sides of the same issue of over 50 years that's kind of frightening. It's not good. And notwithstanding his, clear health concerns, he has very different positions on issues that I think many Democrats find tolerable. I have friends, you're in California, is that right?
I am, yes, Southern California.
Yeah, I grew up in Laguna Beach, California. So I have friends, in Hollywood that are telling me, people who were, on the red carpet 4 years ago, 2 years ago, for that matter, with derogatory, Trump buttons on, are now wearing MAGA hats, and they live in West Hollywood. They don't like the way the country is trending, and these Marxist anarchist groups that are out there in the streets burning buildings down and businesses and shooting people is not something that people are interested in. We're not really interested in having another French Revolution and repeating what happened there, or a Bolshevik revolution.
There was a protest group that actually was hauling around a guillotine down a street. It's like, it's pretty wild.
Well, look what happened to Rick Moranis this morning in New York City at 7:30 in the morning on the Upper West Side.
That was insane.
The guy just walked right by him and punched him in the head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just ridiculous. The guy's 67 years old. He's about 5'3". He's not bothering anybody. And the guy just kept walking. And that's because we don't have law and order in New York City. We're allowing, unfortunately, the seams of social society to be ripped apart by people who are more interested in, occupying an elected office than they are in governing and setting an example. You got this idiot mayor in Portland. My God. And these people don't care about him one iota. They could care less. They don't care who he is.
No, it's true. I've kind of been shaking my head reading about what's going on up there.
Well, and you're seeing it in Los Angeles, and you're seeing it in Orange County, where I'm from. And so whether you like Trump's personality or not, right, people are like, you know what, we're not going to have this. I got to have a strong leader. We need cops on the street. And we need law and order so that the economy can come back. I can keep my job. I can plan for the future, send my kids to school, et cetera, et cetera. Go on vacation, right?
Exactly. It's the American dream,
Well, it's also leadership. It's leadership. But these are things that we all grew up knowing were there. So it is relatable confidence. It's a return to normal. And to the extent that you come down to two candidates in a general election, which is always what it is. It's arithmetic. It's not anything more complicated than that. You go with what you know, and people know not Donald Trump. He's been an iconic name for the better part of 40 years in this country, and you go with what you know.
No, that's very accurate. That actually kind of plays into my second to last question here. That you mentioned in your memo that your prediction of a Trump victory with an electoral vote count of between 300 and 320. Do you do you see the electoral map as being somewhat unchanged from 2016, or do you believe that there's going to be some new acquisitions, so to speak, of states?
Well, I think when you look at the arithmetic of the Electoral College, you could not pick up Minnesota and you could lose Michigan, but if you pick up Pennsylvania, which is 20 electoral votes, and hold the remainder of what you had in 2016, that right there gets you into that realm of it gets you over 270. It gets you into that realm of 300 to 320. I'm looking at states like New Mexico being in play. I'm looking at the possibility of Nevada also flipping red this time, and quite frankly, the race that I mentioned, Minnesota 2, the congressional race, I'm looking at Minnesota potentially flipping to the president as well. And he's been up there plenty of times. He's been up in Wisconsin plenty of times. And you can give the Democrats Michigan if that's the way it turns out. But John James, the Senate candidate who's challenging the incumbent Democrat Gary Peters in the United States Senate race up there, has just pulled ahead by 1.5 points.
That's
so so what are their numbers really showing internally with James? Is that 3 points? Is that a 4.5 point, turnout? They do not have a popular governor in Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, so that does not help them. Tom Wolf in Pennsylvania is not a popular governor in Pennsylvania. The same with Tony Evers in Wisconsin, and the same with the governor of Minnesota, who's a nice guy. I mean, he was a congressman. He's a decent guy, but people are just like, we're done. I mean, look at all these Iron Range Democrat mayors in the northern part of Minnesota that endorsed the president a month and a half ago, because one of them spoke at the RNC. That hadn't happened in a long time, which is why he was in Duluth yesterday.
Yeah. Man, that's incredible.
So those internal polls inside the Trump campaign are telling them something different from what these quote-unquote averages and polls are telling people, or these other groups that got it, massively wrong 4 years ago.
That's interesting, huh? Well, and that kind of the question of polling and everything kind of leads into my last question here, and this is this is probably a pure opinion answer for you, but do you predict, or do you think that we're going to get some type of October surprise this election cycle, or do you think we might come and go without one?
Well, I think it might happen on 2 or 3 fronts. Perhaps he's been now nominated for a 3rd Nobel, so we'll see what the award process is there. I don't have that calendar or schedule in my head, so I can't tell you, do they do that in October? I don't know, but that's possible. I think that the President of the United States has the power to declassify classified information. And if he decides to declassify information regarding what ultimately will be in the Durham report and make it public, that's one.
That'd be
definitely one. Yeah, that is definitely one. The jobs report at the end of October, 3 or 4 days before the election, I think is going to show a quite significant jump in employment. So the unemployment rate ticked down to, I believe, 7.8 from 8.2 today after the 661,000 jobs that were reported. And if you look at the adjustment of the jobs report from last month, they brought that up to 300,000 more. So that's close to 1 million jobs that were created. We are now right at or just over half of the 20 million jobs lost recovered. We're right at about 11 million jobs recovered. So you could see that happen again, and that would be 2. And last but not least, who in the world knows after 50 years of Washington how much more could come out about Joe Biden's challenging record, as well as his running mate, who is not only used the power of her office as Attorney General in California to put a disproportionate number of black people in jail and prison for smoking weed, but now she's out several times being a supporter of Black Lives Matter, which we know is a Marxist anti-American organization. You never know. You never
very
know.
openly.
Well, people just don't read enough of the treaty or information about organizations like this. But it isn't surprising that they removed the anti-nuclear family component from their website 2 weeks ago. They've lost almost 15% of public opinion support since July.
Wow.
Because of the riots, because of the shootings and the attacks on police, and subsequently people were starting to come off their summer vacations and get their kids back to school, whether in person or virtually, and they were reading it and going, uh-oh, what did I just donate $100 to and got a T-shirt for?
Yeah.
Which is probably now in the trash can, and they were wishing they could get a refund.
No, that's very true. That's very interesting. I did not know that about them losing 15% in support.
Yeah.
That's quite large.
It's been significant. And then, the reason why you haven't seen Biden's running mate out publicly, except for her appearance at the NAACP event today, I believe, is because she has a lot of controversial things that she's said, that she's done when she was in previous state office in California at the state level. As well as the support that she's shown for some of these groups, which unfortunately is just political pandering. But at the same time, it is very dangerous because of the office that she would hope to hold, which I don't believe will occur. I think the vote, it's going to be a close election, no question about it. Probably 2, maybe 3 points, if you look at it on a percentage basis. But I believe that the president will get to 270 a heck of a lot faster than most people think, and then exceed that, because people want to get back to normal, Byron. They're like, look, I just want my life back. I want to be able to go hang out with my friends, have a beer, take my kid down to the park, not have to worry about whether I'm going to get attacked outside of my office walking down the street, or be obstructed or attacked in my home in the suburbs or an urban area or even out in a rural area. The other thing that I would say is the contrast between the two candidates and their positions. We don't know a heck of a lot about Joe Biden's positions because he doesn't make himself available and he doesn't talk about it enough. He's not challenged on his positions, which is that the contrasts are so clear that people understand that Trump is for law and order. He's for supporting America. He gave us a very good economy once. He can certainly has the capability to do it again. And why wouldn't we want that instead of higher taxes, uncertainty, more violence, and less law and order? It comes down to that in a general election every time. 50+1 over the other candidate, vice versa, that kind of thing. And the American voter is a hell of a lot smarter than most people think they are. Thank God.
That is very true. They're not given enough credit, No,
they're not. They're not. And fortunately, they have the power to make their voice heard. At least in this democracy, every 4 years. 2 years for a House member and 6 years for a senator. Think about what the removing the filibuster would mean in the Senate, making Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia a state with 4 more senators. That would mean that the idea of the founders, not to go into too much of a history lesson for you, but the idea of the founders was the House of Representatives, the House of the People, gets elected every 2 years, and the Senate gets elected every 6 years to deliberatively cool the passions of the House of Representatives. And in the middle of that, you choose a president every 4 years. If you remove that filibuster, the ability for the minority to stop a piece of legislation from becoming law that might not be in the public's interest, like stacking the Supreme Court, like FDR tried in the 30s and was rebuffed, you would end up with a Senate that didn't mean anything, a House that could decide everything, and a president of that same party then signing off on legislation that has not been well thought out and in many cases may not be in the public's interest or the interest of the country long term. And then you turn the Supreme Court into a legislative body instead of a judicial body by stacking it, knowing that you can always get a majority vote out of it.
Yeah, because I didn't like that one. There's the legislation, I can't remember who it was who proposed it, of wanting to add 18-year term limits to the Supreme Court. And
exactly.
And I don't like that, because it turns it into a political position.
Look, man, the founders were really close to tyranny, and they were some really smart people that put deliberatively through, many years, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and subsequently the Constitution together. And they did these things in the way they did them to be 250 years old, 450 years old, to stand the test of time. And going around and changing that for political gain is just ludicrous. And I don't care whether that's Republican or Democrat. It is not the way that this country was formed, and it is not the reason why so many people still flee their own countries of origin to come here to be more free and to be able to live out their dreams.
No, exactly. Because once you start removing the original foundation of the founders, that's a sure recipe to end up, leading to the destruction of the country, because it's not going to last.
Right. What did I say before? French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution, same exact thing. The people took over because they were, working against the elite, if you will. And in France, that did not leave a very good legacy, and it sure as heck did not leave a good legacy for 80 years in Russia now, or the Soviet Union, now Russia. And we saw what that decline looked like, right? Over 8, almost 9 decades. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It works for people that can make money off of it. It's not sustainable, and it's not free. Scotland is its own country for some very good reasons. The French learned their lesson. The polling, just to circle back to that, is going to show you that people have hardened their positions through thinking about this election. Now that summer is over, they're in the fall. And it's right upon us, and they need to do the right thing for themselves, their communities, their states, and for the country, and vote to have that relatable confidence, as well as that return to normal, by going with what you know. And that's why I'm still very confident that they'll reelect Donald Trump to a second term.
I hope that your predictions in your memo are true, and I think after chatting with you and and having read through it and everything, I think you're more than likely correct on it. It seems very accurate to me, and like you said, we'll know in 32 days. But I think and hope probably you're going to be correct.
I think so. We still have a lot of fight left, and we just need to keep getting the message out and making sure people understand the importance of this election so that things can return back to normal.
I agree, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Anytime.
Man.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and maybe after the election is over, we can chat again about the results.
That would be great. I look forward to that.